Well, it's great to have you with us. I'm Tim Johnson, Curator of Special Collections and Rare Books at the University of Minnesota Libraries. And today we've got a chance to talk to someone special, John Randle, the founder along with his wife Rose of the Whittington Press. And it's been our privilege to have John here for past few days, celebrating the acquisition of the remaining portion of the archive of the Whittington Press. So John, it's good to have you on campus, in the library, and with us this morning.
Well, we always have the feeling of coming home when we come to Minnesota. It really is like a second home to us.
It's good to have you here. I've been wanting to ask a question for some time. It kind of keeps popping in and out of my mind, but and it's this: Do you have printer's ink in your blood? Did you grow up? Is there something genetic, or what's drawn you to?
Not at all, but interestingly, I did find out quite a long time after the press had started that my grandfather's grandfather, Nathaniel Randle, ran a small printing shop in a town called Devizes, which is just a little town in South Wiltshire, and he printed and edited the local newspaper, which was called the Wiltshire Independent, and I think it failed in the end. But I have visited Devizes. I've seen the shop, which is now a tea shop, in the market square. So and I'd love to dig up the floorboards of that tea shop, because I'm sure I found some of his type that slipped through the cracks. But apart from that, that was in the 1850s. Apart from that, absolutely not. No, I mean my my grandfather was quite a celebrated librarian. He was librarian of the India Office Library in Downing Street in London, as it then was. But so books have kind of always been on around the house. But no, I mean there's no kind of genetic thing, I don't think. No.
It just seems so natural for you to be where you are. And by the way, the print shop, is that the photograph that you showed me when I visited you about a year and a half ago?
That's right. That was a photograph that my grandfather, i.e. Nathaniel's grandson, he had it taken. He spent a lot of his time in India as a young man, as a teacher and a librarian, he had that photograph taken in the 1930s, when I think when he just came back to England, when he'd left India and started working in England again. So it's a rather period-looking photograph. Lots of slightly old-fashioned cars and things, and not many cars around. That's why I'm rather fond of it, because it has got the flavour of the sort of pre-motor car era of those small market towns in Wiltshire.
Yeah. Another thought that's come to my mind is, and this may or may not be true, you can tell me, I identify what you and Rose have done with the establishment of Whittington is in some way parallel to William Morris trying to recapture or revolt against the kind of what he was seeing with book production at his time in the late 19th century. You're recapturing that art, letterpress, in the 20th and 21st century. Any resonance there, or am I making too much of a...
No, I think Morris was in a very different position, because Victorian printing was so appalling, to my mind, so ghastly, that something had to be done, and he did it. And not everybody likes what Morris did. I mean, it's pretty black and heavy, but he certainly did shift the parameters and opened the floodgates for the 20th century renaissance of fine printing. I mean, there's no question that the 20th century was produced the finest printing since Gutenberg, and the most varied, to the most varied degree. There are so many different things suddenly happened, and so many styles and so forth. I think my sort of real driving force was I worked in commercial publishing from the time, from through my mid-20s, I would say. And I was very fortunate. I worked for two firms, Ernest Benn, and then a much larger one, Heinemann, which is a big international company. And for them, my job was to design and produce their scientific textbooks, which was more interesting than it sounds, actually, because the great challenge of scientific textbooks was to get kids interested and get them visually interested. So the visual was very, very strong. But you know, we were doing huge editions, you know, like hundreds of thousands in several languages, and most of it was exported. So, and I think, and what I also found was the printers took so little notice of one's design. You'd spend ages doing a design, get it, you know, just right. And then by the time it had gone to the rep, as we called him, the guy that came from the printers, he took it back to the factory, he explained it to the factory manager then explained it to the man on the shop floor, and you had all these trains of command. And so one's precious design got slightly diluted in this process. And I think that one of my main motivations of starting the press was I wanted to do it myself. I cut out all these stages of middlemen. Exactly. And it's just so much easier. You know, you've got a pair of hands, do it yourself. And then you've got nobody else to blame, and you can get it absolutely right. And so this is, I think, really why I enjoyed the press so much at weekends when we started off. See, it was just a hobby when it began, was to go down to Whittington, fiddle around with type to my heart's content, not be worried about the costs of correction or the printer saying, oh no, that's we don't want to do that, it's not going to suit our particular methods, etc. You could just clear the decks and do it yourself, and that for me, it was such a luxury to be able to do that at weekends.
You got to tinker around.
Absolutely. You can just tinker to your, it's like, there's an expression in England, messing about in boats. I don't know if you have that sort of thing. I mean, people mess about in boats at the weekend a lot in England. Well, I was sort of messing about with type.
Who's printing outside of what you and your son Patrick do at Whittington do you most admire?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I certainly couldn't name names, but
or in a general sense.
Well, in a general sense, I find American printing terribly exciting, actually, and that is one of the great bonuses for us of coming over here. I mean, Rose and I were trying to tot it up the other day. I think we've been here somewhere between 30 and 40 times.
And when you said that, that surprised not only me, but a number of other people, that you made that many trips.
This was a lesson I learned when I was working in publishing. That was really my university training, you know, was working in publishing. And if you work in a publishing office where lots of things go on, you keep your ears and your eyes open the whole time. And one of the golden rules in both, well, particularly at Ben's, was when you have a book, find an American publisher, because you have, you know, what, 10 times the population of England, and if one can button into that market, latch into that market, then, you know, that particular book has a much greater chance of coming home and making a profit. So this was kind of hardwired into me that we speak the same language, there's a huge potential market there, and one must get on and do it. And so that is one reason, just the sales thing for coming to America. But the other terrific bonus is meeting other American printers, because there's actually, over in this country, America, there's so much, it's a real sort of, all the rules are broken in a very nice way. There's a tremendous creativity, and it's very inspiring, actually. I think that the British and possibly European, and one shouldn't make these generalizations, but I think we're all a bit more hidebound over there. Whereas over here, there's a spirit of adventure, and let's give it a try. And that's what's so refreshing about this country altogether, actually. So I would say that some of my favorite printers are certainly American. Yes, I would say definitely. Yeah. The people who go out there, find the ideas, create the projects, do the printing, and often print very, very beautifully as well. Because I think technique is not an end in itself, but it certainly helps along the way with the end product.
How would you describe not only Whittington, but maybe other letterpress publishers, printers, in this kind of transitional period, or is it a transitional period where so much is digital these days, and printing letterpress is an anomaly? How do you see?
Well, I have quite clear views on this, and I don't think they're particularly fashionable. But Bernard Roberts, who was a very fine printer, he was a commercial printer, and he became a priest in the end. And he said, the Randles, I quote him from something or other, the Randles still print letterpress as God intended. And for me, printing, and I know, I'm probably speaking out of line here, but printing for me is printing letterpress from metal type. And I know we're spoiled in a way at Whittington, because we're one of the very, very few presses worldwide who have our own type founding facility. I mean, we have monotype, so it's easy for us. I mean, if we want a book set in, 12-point Bembo or 16-point Polyphilus or 24-point Baskerville, I walk to the other end of the press where we have 3 monotype casters, machine casters. One of the most skilled operators in the world, Neil Winter. And I just say, Neil, this one is going to be in 14-point Bembo. And he says, oh, good, we haven't tried that for a bit. So, so we've got this huge range of matrices, large chunk of which we saved, I should say, from Oxford University Press when they were throwing them all out in the mid-80s. And so it's easy for me to do that. But I know that the vast majority of printers have a real problem finding type, particularly over here. They have to travel vast distances. And, if you can tap it out on a computer and make a polymer plate, I mean, what a temptation to do that. Yeah. But, okay, so that's the situation. But I stick to my ground here, and I'm rather rude in Matrix sometimes about men who print from plastic. Well, this is the way I feel, but I can just see the difficulty of their position, that they, what else can they do? Because type wears out, and unless you can have a supply of type and so on, where do you turn? So it's easy for me to say this, but I say it because I believe it very earnestly. I don't think I could ever really come to love a book printed from plastic plates.
Will that be Whittington's legacy? Or how would you describe the legacy of Whittington?
I don't know what our legacy really is. I mean, we just get on and do every job. But I think perhaps where we differ from some other presses, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, is that for me, a big chunk of the excitement of doing a book and undertaking a letterpress book is a hell of an undertaking. It's it's a logistical and financial, I shall say, nightmare. You know, it's a real worry, and you just have to sort of put up with that. But I think what is the bit I enjoy so much is actually finding the material, getting it into shape, creating the idea. Ideas never come through the mail, ever. I don't think we hardly ever published a book that plopped through the post box and we thought, oh, how nice, let's do that. We always nearly always generate the ideas. And so, and this really is the publishing side of it, which fascinates me, because there are so few ideas that will translate into a letterpress book, which inevitably has to sell at a higher price than, you know, the thing you find in a bookshop. And so I love that side of it, and creating the book, working with the illustrator, working with the author. And if you publish it yourself, you have complete control over everything, every last little detail. And those are so important, the last little details, they really are. So I think that I would say that our publishing is frightfully important. But it does, you know, it's not an easy option, because when you come to sell the book, you're not dealing with one customer. You don't deliver 100 books and a bill and get a check back. You know, you publish a book, you've got 100 people to sell it to and 100 people to deal with, and that's what Rose does from home, you see, so well. And she knows all our customers personally. But it's hugely rewarding if it works. So I would say, in a way, we're not printers, actually. I mean, that's just the icing on the cake. What we really are, and over a period of time, that's what has kept us afloat financially, is we're publishers. And the choice of the material is just so critical. Printing is a very straightforward business. You know, there's nothing magic about it. If you've got good type, a really large, heavy, accurate press, nice paper, I don't see how anybody can fail to print well if it's difficult to do it.
And you print very, very well.
Well, I print in a way that gives me pleasure. I'm not saying whether we print well or badly, but if I'm satisfied with it, then okay, I'm satisfied with it. If other people think that's good printing, well, I mean, I'm delighted. I'm delighted if they do, but I'm really just doing it to satisfy myself, not anybody else. Rather selfish.
One other thing that's brought pleasure, and with this we'll end, if you've got a final comment to describe the pleasure of the relationship with the University of Minnesota and the chance that I've had and others have had.
Well, this is a very unusual relationship, I think. You see, a lot of American institutions, traditionally, the wealthy ones, particularly after the Second World War, I think, they bought hugely from the UK. Because they had the money, and all our individuals and so on were cash strapped. And so, you know, places like Texas and UCLA and the Ivy League ones and so on and so forth, it's easy for them, I was thinking the other day, to buy chunks of Golden Cockerel Press books. I mean, anybody can do that. And also, perhaps to a slightly lesser extent, by all the correspondence, like all Christopher Sanford's correspondence, a lot of which, I think some of it went to the Newberry Library, some of it went to Texas. Well, that's easy to buy a chunk of correspondence when somebody's dead, basically. You know, there it is, and so you just pay the heirs. And all Eric Gill's stuff, which is in the Clark Library, a fabulous collection. Well, if you've got the wherewithal, that's a fairly straightforward transaction, and then it gets put on the shelf, and it's marvellous for scholars to look at in the years to come. I think what's so unusual about our relationship with Minnesota is that we developed this relationship with Elmer Anderson via Jim Sitter when we were 10 years old, when the press was 10 years old. You know, we'd been going barely a decade. He saw something that he liked, and what I liked so much and admired him and the university for was that they backed their enthusiasm by buying our our first lot of archive and our first lot of books, which could never be repeated. I mean, there are some items there which will never ever come onto the market. And so the university has a complete set of our early books in all their various different states, including some, very ephemeral little things. And those, as you know, can be the most difficult things to find. So what I really appreciate and like about our relationship is it's been a continuing one. It's not just a question of somebody writing out a check and getting a load of files. It's something that has continued, and the university has kept up its enthusiasm for our books, bought everything we've done, and gradually accumulated our archives. And I love that. But from our point of view, you see, we're publishers, so our files, I think, will be quite interesting in the future, because we have dealt, particularly with the publication of Matrix, which is a huge editorial job. We've dealt with, since the first issue in 1981, we've dealt with all those many of those great names in the letterpress revival from pre-war. They were still around, you see, when Matrix was going. So there's correspondence from all these characters. And they, of course, some of those were the ones that went through all the archives in other Texas and other universities, and we published a lot of those letters in Matrix. So, I mean, we did benefit ourselves hugely from from other major American collections, particularly in the up to Matrix 20 or so. I mean, we had an awful lot of that kind of material which needed publishing, and it was absolutely fascinating stuff. But I really like the idea that the way that Minnesota has taken an interest from the start, and these files will contain, I think, a lot of interesting material, because there are letters there. A lot of them are handwritten in the days when people used to get out a pen, a sheet of paper with a letterpress heading on it, write a letter, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, and send it. And actually those are particularly nice, because you get a really personal feeling there that you don't get from an email. But I think there's a huge amount of material in our files that, in the years to come will be quite useful for people who are interested in this 20th and 21st century letterpress revival. I think we've been very much a part of that, simply because we've been around and taken an interest. And it's nice to know that you've got all the stuff here for people to ferret around in the future.
Yeah, it's nice for us. It will be nice for anyone who comes after us to.
Exactly. It's there, you see.
There,
and the part that you personally play in this, is that you're putting the stuff in order, listing it on the computer or wherever, and doing all that very, very necessary. You're making it accessible.
Right.
You see, it's been sticking around in our attics for God knows how long. But it's so nice that you're looking after it, making it accessible, and I think this is a terribly important part of the whole process.
It's been a fun thing to work on since the boxes arrived, the crates arrived, and John, it's been a joy to have you and Rose here on campus these last few days. Thank you for spending this time with us here.
No, it's us that are in your debt.
Thank you.